And our mini speaker today is going to be Dennis Gorton, and a lot of you already know Dennis. He's spoken to us on a previous occasion, quite some time back, about cutting a Volkswagen engine in half. He is a retired school teacher. He's been gliding for 40 years and has been a member of the Old Fliers group since the earliest days.
A long-time friend of mine who's since passed on. He was a brilliant glider pilot, Cathay Pacific Czech captain. His great call to fame was doing long distance flying in a motorised self-launching glider. And Hal Sutton, who was also a foundation member of this group, and I and Tug's then wife Marlene helped him, crewed for him on the Cross Australia flight. I don't know whether you're aware or not, but the word name Tug is tacked on to all Wilsons, particularly in the Navy. They're either Tug Willson or Bungy Willson. And as Tug joined the RAF at a young age, he hated his name, Bernard John Wilson, and he accepted the Tug, and from then on he was Tug. Tug was born in 1936, and as far as I can work out, he died quite tragically with a horrible cancer around about 1988. He joined the RAF as a PTI, and those of you in the services know that PTIs are strong in the back and weak in the head. Tug was far from being weak in the head. He was quite a gung-ho type of person. He was a brilliant organiser. He was a gentleman, but he was just slightly eccentric at times. And to give you an idea of what I mean by this, Marlene gave him a new watch for his 50th birthday. He went into the pool with it. Wasn't sure whether it was waterproof or not, but just to make sure, he put it in the microwave oven. Oh. We first met him about 1981, and I bought off him a airband VHF radio, which he demonstrated with the wrong power pack and blew it up. But apart from this, he was a brilliant chap. He trained as a glider pilot in the RAF, and he used to walk down to work every morning with the CO of the air station in the south of England. And the CO said this particular morning, they're having a bit of trouble down at the gliding club, you better get down there and help them out. So Tug did, and took up gliding, and subsequently became a world-class distance flyer. From that, he joined air crew and trained as a pilot in the RAF. He went on and retired as a squadron leader. He was a senior pilot in the Queen's flight, and on retirement he went to Hong Kong and joined Cathay. Flight down here to Perth was around about 1981 when we met him, and he called me up. My name was in the phone book as the contact for the Narrogin Gliding Club. And Tug, part of his gliding, that he wanted to get some long distance. And so he joined Narrabeen, and he was a member of the Narrabeen Club until, excuse me, about 1985, 86. The first flight that we were aware of, we converted him to the old Cirrus and sent him off on a 300, which I recall was cool and Queriting, about 308 kilometres. The day was very mediocre, and we thought, well, we'll just sit here for 10 minutes because he's going to be back for shore. 5 hours later he came back and he'd completed the triangle, and when we checked the barograph it looked like a sawtooth. The highest he got was 5,000 feet, and most of it was around about between 3,000 and 4,000 feet. And he did a 307 in just under 5 hours. We realised at this time that we had a brilliant pilot. That's another photo of the pic that we're going to talk about next month. There's Tug after the Cross Australia flight. He imported the glider into Hong Kong and conned the authorities into letting him fly it from Cathay Airport. This is the area where his house was, and he used to take off from Cathay and come along the hills and ridge-saw the hills. He pulled a bit of a shufti and tried to be smart. He painted the glider like a Cathay with the green nose and stripe. And just to get in good with Cathay, he applied for the registration Go CPA, which he kept for about a year until the authorities caught up with him. They made him take the hyphen out there and stick it in there, so that it became Golf Oscar CPA. There's a photo of the glider in front of a 747, give you an idea. Notice the registration. First of all was when he bought the PIC 20 self-launcher from Finland, and they delivered it to Lasham, I think it was. He was test flying it and he got cut in half by a power pilot, and the aircraft was written off. He did a deal with the insurance company and they agreed to give him another one, so he went to Finland and picked it up, and so that there could be no mistakes this time, he flew it from Finland back to England. He then went on later to fly the length of Japan, over to the United States, and he flew from somewhere up near Vancouver down near the Mexican border. And it was when he was doing these that the seed was sown to do a cross Australia flight. So you can see that we're dealing with a bloke that had plenty of clues. We put that one in there because it's the 3 diamond badge. You see the 3 diamonds up the top there. The height diamond is probably the hardest to get in Australia. You've got to do a climb of 5,000 metres up above your launch height. So if you launch to 3,000, you've got to, if you launch to 1,000 metres, you've got to do another 5 to get your diamond. The Narrabeen Gliding Club, together with other clubs, quite often go down to the Stirling Ranges, and I think there's been 36 or 40 diamonds down there. Tug got his on the Bishop Wave, and I'm mentioning this because next year I'm going to give you another lesson on flying the standing waves. And the Bishop wave is one of the best in the world. A fellow by the name of Paul Bickle still holds the single seat height record at 46,000 feet on the Bishop wave. And this is when the seed for the trip across Australia was sown. This is what he intended to do, and that's the actual flight and the distances that we're going to talk about. The aircraft arrived in Sydney. The traffic authority immediately inspected the trailer, wouldn't accept the tow hitch, wouldn't accept the electrical plug. So an ex-Narrogin member who had met us, a fellow by the name of Gavin Sutherland, met us, and he took us up to Bathurst and pinched the coupling off his own trailer, and Hal and Tug had gone into Sydney and bought the electrical plug. So we had the electrical plug on and the new trailer hitch on, but this cost us 1 day. That's the crew at Camden. A lot of you remember old Hal. This is the crew alongside the old Mercedes diesel that was Hal's pride and joy. And this was the bit in the paper about what he intended to do. And we moved down to Camden, and he did some demonstration flights for the paper, and set off on the first day. And he knew when he took off that it was going to be aborted because it was a real rough day with rain intended and what have you. The rain set in, and he was only airborne for an hour or so, and he came back, and we started again the next day. The next day he flew to Leeton and broke the record for that type of glider. Camden to Leeton was 430 k's. That's a photo of the Leeton airport. That's the gliding strip there. The clubhouse was about there somewhere. The gliding folk met us, and they booked accommodation for us, and they looked after us. And next day was Mildura, and I think he broke the record again. It was 455. That was a further up in the record. Once again, the gliding folk looked after us, did all the bookings for us, and made us welcome. Next one was to Port Augusta, and he upped the record again. This time it was 455, that's right. And the next one he upped it again, and that was a very interesting one. He went to a place called Ulata, and those of you that have driven across will know that Ulata is an Aboriginal settlement. That's the highway there, that's the mission, and that's a little airstrip. He took off from Augusta and had a bit of a bomb out, and realised that he wasn't going to be able to make it, so he landed, and we reset the barograph. He had 2 barographs, one to measure whether the engine was on or off, and the other one was the normal barograph to measure the height and the distance. So we reset that, and he got going, and we set off in the Mercedes.
Dennis, how much of the time on these legs was spent under power, and how much of it in soaring flight?
He was only allowed to climb to 3,000 feet, 3,280 feet. And my job as the official observer was to make sure that he was overhead and the engine stopped. And you could hear the engine stop. It's a two-stroke and it makes plenty of noise. Dennis will tell you about it. Dennis McNeil owns the thing now, and it makes plenty of noise. So you can tell when that stops, and you can see the engine fold away into the fuselage. And then the barograph takes over, and he's not allowed to start it then until the next day. This is the most interesting part of the whole trip. He didn't take off from Yalata because he wasn't supposed to land there anyway. And a little bit of a side one there. He landed, got out, turned the barograph off, and looked up in time to see a whole heap of Aborigines descending on him with spears and nullas and woomers and what have you. Tug, being an uninitiated Pom, thought they were attacking, jumped in, prayed that the engine would start, and took off just as the Mercedes was coming in. Now, the reason that he went to Yalata was to get a few extra Ks onto the distance so that he got another record. That Port Augusta to Yalata was 595 kilometres, so he upped it quite a lot. He then motored back to Nundroo, where we had booked accommodation to the roadhouse there, and the Mercedes did a U-ing and followed him back. Then the next day was the most interesting day of the whole trip. He took off from Nundroo on a day that you and I wouldn't even push the living aeroplane out of the hangar. And we thought, well, we'll be very, very lucky if he stays alive. And if you drive that little bit of bush between Nullarbor Plain and Nundroo, there's not much there to generate a thermal, and we thought we'll be very, very lucky. But he plugged away and plugged away. We got to the edge of the forest. He radioed up and he said, "What's the wind doing?" And we said, "Oh, it's from the south." And he said, "I've got about 1,500 feet, I'm going to blow it and get down onto the ridge and see if the ridge is working along the cliffs." We held our breath. We didn't hear, because when he got down low, he was flying the cliffs at about 500 or 600 feet, and we lost radio contact for half an hour or so, and we just motored along, and he got onto the ridge, and he flew the ridge all the way to Eucla, and we couldn't keep up with him. We got radio contact a couple of times and said, "Well, you know, the old Mercedes is hemorrhaging a bit. We can't keep up with you." And he said, "Oh, well, I'll go and buzz the scenic thing." So he called into the scenic things on the cliffs there now and again and buzzed the people and wasted a bit of time till the Mercedes caught up. And we got to Eucla, and he said, I'll land at Eucla. And so we went to the little Eucla airstrip and waited for him there. He flew the last cliff, flew inland and got a thermal to 2,000 feet and said, "I'm going to go in onto the scarp and see if I can do a little bit more, and I'll see you at Mundrabilla." So back we went, and if you've ever driven across there, have a look at the scarp that he flew from Eucla to Mundrabilla at about 500 or 600 feet above the ground. It was a terrific, terrific flight. We got to Mundrabilla and it was nearly nightfall, So we booked in there. He landed on a little bush strip that you and I wouldn't even look at. And Hal by this time had conjunctivitis, and he was in a pretty bad way. And Tug was pretty tired, so we decided to have a rest day and take Hal back to Eucla where there was a nurse. So we took him back next day, and the nurse dressed his gammy eye, and we had a good night's sleep, and then started off again next day. That was where he arrived in Western Australia, and this was Mundrabilla to Kalgoorlie. The car had to come on the road, which is this one here, and Tug flew the ridge to Madeira Pass and got his first thermal, and called us up and said, I'm heading inland for Kalgoorlie, and he got out to about here somewhere, and we lost radio contact with him. And of course we're going like the clappers trying to get to Kalgoorlie, but just out of Norseman we got a Qantas 747 on the radio saying, we've just been talking to your mate. He told us to tell you that he's okay and he'll see you in Kalgoorlie. He used his knowledge as an airline pilot and changed the frequency to the Qantas frequency, and so we headed off. Anyone remember a fellow by the name of Tug Dawson? Tug Dawson had the flying school up at Kalgoorlie, I think, at the time, and he met Tug and organised the accommodation for us. Tug got there at sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we got there about 4:45. The next one was to Cunderdin, Kalgoorlie to Cunderdin. A lot of you know that airstrip. And he got to Cunderdin the next day for 420 k's. It was well timed because the West Australian Gliding Championships had just finished that day, and they were having their break-up party, and they had hoped that Tug would get there, and they made him guest speaker for a little 10-minute talk on the trip over. The next day was Cunderdin to Mandurah, which was only 170, and that's the glider just approaching Sutton Field. There's old Hal and Sutton Field. Hal's house was up the back here somewhere. That's the group. Yours truly and Hal and Marlene and Tug's wife and Tug. That's the one that was in the newspaper. That's the crew on Sutton Field. That's the Cathay representative lady and Marlene and I checking the barograph just to make sure that the engine hadn't come on. He was made a freeman of the Mandurah Shire, and that's the plaque that they gave him. This was in the District Times up in Hong Kong, where they reported the flight and made mention of an envisaged one to fly across China, which never eventuated. And that was the report in one of the English papers. Tug back in his home in Hong Kong with a photo of the pic. That's the pic on the day it left Narrabeen. I had my last flight in it. You'll notice here the registration is GUX.